crowd goes wild. Woo! This shindig is on the road. Let me make sure my phone isn't going to ring in the middle of this. And questions here, and... All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christian Hine. I am the editor of PunditHouse.com, and I'm the current president of Caution, which is the Charlotte Tea Party. I will be the one that's moderating this event tonight. This is the first and only U.S. Senate candidate debate that was inclusive in its invitations to all 6 of the candidates that you of the voting public will have the opportunity to choose between when you vote on November the 4th. Let's take a quick moment to thank our sponsors for this forum, Free the Vote North Carolina, Young Americans for Liberty, the Carolina Liberty PAC, Caution, and I believe the UNC Charlotte chapter of the North Carolina Student Legislature. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. A special thanks to UNC Charlotte as well for providing this venue to us, all the students that helped to promote this event. And on behalf of the sponsors, we really do want to thank you for taking your time to be here tonight. Your right to vote is one of the most fundamental to the functioning of our government, and it is not one to take lightly. Those we elect play a major role in influencing policy that affects our everyday lives. Every candidate deserves the opportunity to have their positions heard and weighed against your personal values. Your vote should reflect those values and be for the candidate you agree with the most, regardless of party affiliation. Honest voting is the only way that your voice will ever truly be heard. So again, thank you for taking the time to join us on this Friday night to come and educate yourself about these candidates. So let's go ahead and introduce them. I'll just name Barry Gurney on the far left. Not necessarily the left, but for me, on the left. Sean Haugh, the Libertarian candidate, party nominee. I've neglected to mention that Barry is a write-in candidate. Unaffiliated. John Rhodes, another write-in candidate.
Good evening.
And David Waddell, write-in candidate. So thank you guys. Let's see, the format of the debate will be as follows. Each candidate will be given a 1-minute opening statement to quickly introduce yourselves to the audience. The way the questions will be asked is we will start with one candidate who will have up to 2 minutes to answer the question. Each candidate will then have the same question and the same amount of time as we go down the line. The next question will begin with the second candidate and proceed the way the first one did, so that this way every candidate will have the opportunity to answer a question first and last. Where's our timekeeper? Who is there, Jordan? Okay, Jordan has 2 signs. When he holds up the yellow one, that means that we have 30 seconds left in your answer. And the red means, well, stop talking. As I said, 2 minutes is what the length of time is that you will have. You don't have to use the entire 2 minutes. I know you're running for office. It's very tempting to talk as long as possible, but we have a lot of questions, and if you don't necessarily need the full 2 minutes, it'll help us get to additional questions throughout. So just do what makes you comfortable. The questions were developed via suggestions on topics from people who contacted us via Facebook and Twitter. There are a lot of overlapping themes that we received. And so a number of cases we've simply combined questions or just rewritten them for the sake of clarity. Some of the questions also contain multiple elements in an effort to sort of prompt discussion. You don't necessarily have to answer every bullet point to every question. It's just to help you thematically get an idea for that topic so you can share your opinion with the audience. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start with our candidate introductions, and we will start with Mr. Gurney.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan, for setting it all up. I think it's really cool that you do this, because this is just not a forum for people that aren't in the system to be heard. So that's thank you. Anyhow, my name's Barry Gurney. I'm from the coast. I'm unaffiliated, and I choose that because it's just the way to be. I think that the Republican and the Democrat parties have melded almost into the same actions, different way to get there, but that's pretty much what they are. I think pretty much, I can't speak for them, but from what I know from my fellow candidates, I think that's pretty much what we're all doing here. There's just a system that's not working anymore, and we need to address it. And so if we can create a buzz, if we can create some sort of an interest into dragging the parties back to a republic, I think that would be the way to go, and I thank you for your time.
Mr. Haugh.
Howdy, I'm Sean Haugh, Libertarian for U.S. Senate in North Carolina in 2014, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. My main issue is to stop all war. We need to stop the direct warfare that we've got going on right now in Iraq and Syria in particular. The last two Iraq wars for us have been disastrous, and there is no amount of bombing that is going to fix the least little bit of the mess we've created there now. And one of the big problems that we have there too is that we are also arming pretty much everybody out there, always looking for moderate Syrian rebels to arm and train. And we need to stop militarization of police at home, militarization of the border. War infects so much of our public policy. We also need to stop spending more money than we have. Our debt is unsustainable. We need to get out in front of it now and balance the budget at a much lower level and let you keep all the money that you earn. Thanks.
Well, good evening. I'm John Rhodes. I'm an unaffiliated write-in candidate for this Senate race. I'm a former legislator in the North Carolina House of Representatives and served from 2003 to 2007. When I was in the North Carolina House, I served as a Republican. And I spoke out against a lot of the corruption and the cronyism that was going on up there, and my own party actually came after me and attacked me for doing that. I was primaried out of office in 2006 by Thom Tillis. And so now, 8 years later, I've been trying to mind my own business, but folks have come to me and said, John, we just don't really feel like we have a choice in this race. Would you run as a write-in candidate? And if you were elected, will you serve in Washington? And I said, well, my whole life is about public service, so how could I not say yes? I'm John Rhodes. I'm an unaffiliated write-in candidate. I served as a Republican when I was in the North Carolina House, but I am unaffiliated now. I want to thank you guys for coming out tonight, and I want to thank Free the Vote for this evening tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Waddell.
I'm David Waddell. I'm a self-employed business owner, small business owner. I have a family and 3 children, very normal person as far as that goes. I decided to run, just like these other gentlemen, to offer another choice in addition to the typical Republican and Democrat scenarios. But I also wanted to offer a full platform. I didn't want to be a simple protest vote. And that's why I chose the Constitution Party platform to run on and offer to the people and just try to be a good representation of the platform and the ideas and communicate those to folks who may not be familiar with even anything outside of the spheres of influence of the Republican and Democrat parties. And I wanted to challenge a two-party system. I wanted to challenge the common thoughts out there and just give someone to think about, something to think about, something to actually vote for instead of against.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll begin the questioning now. Mr. Haugh, we will begin with you.
Okay.
To begin our discussion, please share with us your core governing philosophy and how you arrived at your beliefs. What is the proper role of government, and how do you see yourself playing into that role as a United States Senator?
Well, I believe that our federal government has gotten to be way too big, and we need to vastly reduce the size and scope of federal government. It has claimed to rule over us in pretty much every aspect of our daily lives. And our Constitution is fairly clear that the scope of government is supposed to be limited to certain areas, and other parts of it are supposed to be reserved to the states, or more importantly, the people. I believe that you should be able to live your life as you see fit, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, keeping anybody else from exercising that same right. And so I think government should simply be limited to keeping the peace among people and some very basic core functions that are spelled out in the United States Constitution. I consider the Constitution to be my compromise position in that words mean things, and we need to get back to what the Constitution has to say. And once we are able to reduce government to that point, then we can talk more about how to further reform government.
Mr. Rhodes?
Well, let me make it really simple here. We already have an owner's manual, and it's called the Constitution. We don't really have to be creative or kind of go outside and think outside the box. We need to think within the boundaries of the Constitution. It's as simple as that. Our founding fathers did a great job creating this nation. They wrote a great document. Some have talked about having a constitutional convention. But you know what? We need to just enforce the one that we have now and follow the one that we have now. Core functions of government, let me just be simple with you as an elected official. Our chief objective and our chief job as an elected official at the state and federal level is to follow that Constitution, defend the Constitution. And every decision that I make as an elected official comes down to two things. Does it put more money and power in government's hand, or does it put more money and power in the people's hands? And if it puts more power in government's hands, I'm going to fight against it as I did when I was in the North Carolina House. And if any of you followed my politics, I'm very vocal about that and very aggressive about that because I care about the citizens of North Carolina. If it puts more power in the people's hands, I'm going to fight for it.
Thank you. Mr. Waddell.
The purpose of just government is to preserve the lives, the liberties, and the properties of the individuals, the rights of the individual. Government doesn't grant you rights. Government is supposed to safeguard those rights and to provide a means to solve discrepancies. That's why we have courts, to provide a means to address threats to the liberties of the individuals. That's why we have police and militia, military. So even without the Constitution, the purpose of government is to safeguard the individual's liberties and rights. So you add the Constitution back into that, and we can get an idea of just how far our government has drifted from that original intent and that original purpose.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
First of all, the government's rotten to the core, so we can put that away right now. There's a lot wrong. I think that if you take and you look at the governing core, if you will, our foundation is a Christian nation. We were founded as a Christian nation. The moral laws that we have is from the Bible. The founding fathers used the Bible in schools to teach education, reading and writing. And I'm not saying that that's the only thing that's wrong with the core of the government, because it's not. But that's a leading cause. And what we have to do is take a macro on this government and see what's wrong with it. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to fix it from the top down. I believe that the presidency is unattainable by an average citizen. It is unattainable. And why I decided to run for Senate, U.S. Senate, was because that's the next closest step to getting to the presidency. If we can take back the Senate as conservative people who believe in the core, on what was founded, and the Constitution and the Bible, then we'll have a much better chance of reviving and getting the nation back on track. But we can't do it from the presidency. The House is pretty representative. I think it does a good job of representing each and every person in this country. They, in the districts, may get gerrymandered here and there, but the Senate needs to be taken care of, and I think that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next question will begin with Mr. Rhodes. The tuition and fees of a 4-year public college education increased by 2.9% in 2013, the smallest one-year increase since the mid-'70s, but net prices, which is what students and families actually have to pay after grant aid, scholarships, and tax credits are subtracted, have increased since 2010 because financial aid has not kept pace with the growth in college tuition costs. Why is college so expensive? What role, if any, should government play in alleviating the financial burden of university students?
Well, I think one of the things we have to look at is, the free market and competition. And if this school is very expensive to go to, perhaps you choose a less expensive school to go to. Government can't be all things to all people. We certainly want to try to be compassionate. We certainly want to help students advance in their academic careers and their academic time. Hopefully you don't make a career out of academics on that 12-year program. But, you know, government can't be all things to all people. You know, we have to go out there and we have to work and we have to be committed to trying to make choices. I'd love to send my child to a $15,000 a year middle school, but I can't because we can't afford it. My wife and I, we sit around a kitchen table and we sharpen a pencil and we have to make decisions. So it's a difficult time. But please don't look at me as a senator going to the U.S. Senate, and many people won't like this, but I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you what I believe the truth is. And that is, government can't be all things to all people. We have to have a lot of the responsibility to pull our own weight.
Thank you. Mr. Waddell.
Well, first of all, in regards to the office of the U.S. Senate, I don't think the federal government has any business whatsoever in education. It needs to pull out of it 100% totally. I'm talking about financing and everything. That needs to be turned over to the states, allow each state to have its own educational system. States want rooftops. They want population. They want people to move to them. How do you get them to move to them? You have good schools. That's the first thing people ask for. So you have 50 competing for the best system. That improves quality, drives down costs, and you know, competition is a good thing even in education. But the reason why it has gone up is because this stuff right here, this is 1 troy ounce of silver bullion, and used to be worth $1 in the 1920s. Now it's somewhere around 20 bucks. It was $4 in 1990, so is minimum wage per hour. So if you want to know why labor is devalued and the cost of everything is going up, check out the gold and silver standard. That's the core of the problem. Your money is not worth what you think it is, and therefore your labor isn't worth as much as it is, and it costs more of your time and your labor to purchase an education. That being said, on the state level, your North Carolina Constitution does state that the North Carolina college system shall be offered to its residents as close to free of cost as possible. Those of you in college might want to read your state constitution and maybe take that up with the administration.
Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
Sure, this is another multifaceted issue. Back, I'm probably the oldest candidate here, but back when I was younger, schools, high schools, they had trades in high schools, and then they had trade schools, and so on and so forth. Not everybody that grows up wants to be in college. They just don't. And rather than relegate them to a menial job or work their way up, I think that we could do a lot by having the trade schools put back into the system. And if out of the current budgets, I don't believe in increasing any budget whatsoever. But on the other end of the scale, on the university side, it's sad because you got incredible loans. You have incredible loans, and then on top of it, you can't even get a job. I mean, so if you really want to get to the root, it's the job market, the job market. If the job market would pick up, if it was more of a market that would make it easier for people to start businesses, to have business, to increase their businesses, then that would go a long ways to making it worthwhile to have a higher education. And then again, if you specialize, if you're going for liberal arts, then I don't think that you're going to get your value. I may be a bunch of you here, but I'm not ashamed of it. I'm just saying that's a fact. But if you're going to become a scientist, or if you're going to become an engineer, if you're going to become this, you're going to become that, a mathematician, a professor, whatever, then you have an opportunity to pay back that loan at a much faster rate and much easier on you. But the cost of the education system, that government wants to put parameters on private businesses, but they refuse to put any parameters on the cost of tuition.
Thank you. And Mr. Haugh.
This is really very basic economics, where if the federal government is willing to flood this market of higher education with money, well then of course the institutions are going to continue to raise the price to soak up all of that money. And so paradoxically, by trying to help people make college more attainable, they've made it unaffordable. So one of the things that we need to do first is to really try to reduce the amount of money that the federal government is pumping into the system. Because right now, the cost of college has become so ridiculously high that there really isn't a great economic incentive to go to college. And then on top of that, you have the whole student loan problem, where people who are graduating today, in order to be able to go to college at all, pretty much everyone is saddled with this massive amount of debt. And, that's no way to live. That only keeps you, I think it limits your options a lot. In order to try to find employment, you have to go out and get the kind of job where you can pay off this debt. You really don't have the freedom to maybe take the kind of job that you want, or try to start your own job in this economy, which is supposed to be a lot easier to do now, and on the internet and the like. So I would advocate, actually, I think that we should just wipe away student loan debt. I think it's basically been a scam when people are told to come to college and we'll give you all these benefits, and then you get out with some training, and then tens of thousands of dollars will take you forever to pay off. You need to just start that system over entirely.
All right, thank you. For our next question, we will begin with Mr. Waddell. The United States leads the world in energy consumption per capita, and access to electricity is obviously vital to our way of life. What are your views on energy production? Should certain electric generating technologies be subsidized or banned? Should there be higher requirements for energy efficiency, such as CAFE standards?
I think the best thing the federal government could do for energy is what it can do for education, is get the heck out of the business. Turn it over to the states. They're perfectly capable of regulating their own matters. Abolish the Department of Energy. And if you want to put money into something, maybe a reward for a targeted goal. Create energy, so many watts, megawatts of power with so little input or something. Make a benchmark. And that really doesn't need to be a federal government issue either. So I think free market is unbeatable as far as offering the potential for exploration, development, and research. Yes, it's expensive, but part of the expense is the regulations. So I think a lot could be accomplished from just simply redoing the federal government's perspective of it, turn it over to the states.
Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
Well, another problem with the federal government. They're trying to regulate everything through EPA, and President Obama himself said that he was going to bankrupt coal companies. North Carolina has a nuclear reactor, and I'm not sure how much electricity they get from coal, but the United States gets 38 to 40% of their electricity from coal. So when they put these extreme regulations on the coal-fired plants, which, by the way, are some of the cleanest in the world, but they put that onus on them, it's going to drive them out of business or drive up their costs. Well, and as with anything that the government gets into, that's going to drive up your costs. If you think you pay a lot more for education and health insurance and everything else, groceries, gasoline, although that's come down, that's only because of the free market drilling on their own land and fracking, whether you're on that side or not. It's just a fact of the matter that they've made America more energy independent. So by driving up the price of energy with the coal plants being phased out by the government, everybody's going to pay for it, and yet there's no system in place to replace it. They just need to have a better thought about what they're doing. There's no thought process. It seems like they sit around, they have a good idea in their mind, and then they just say, well, okay, let's do it, and they have no plan. It's sort of like the healthcare system. They just don't know what they're doing. So it has to be a lot more common sense brought to the table through the Senate so that they can at least oversee and bring some more sensibility to the government.
Thank you. Mr. Haugh.
We get into a lot of problems with the federal government trying to pick winners and losers in industry, and this is really the starkest example where you have a system now where government is trying to dictate all of these decisions about how we're going to look for new energy. And given the control control that it has, it makes it possible for these large corporate special interests to come in and buy up legislation and buy up politicians and to be able to get all of the rules set their way. For example, you look at issues like offshore oil drilling or fracking that's going on. You have to come to government to get permission to do these things. These are not things that would happen in the free market. They need protection from the full liability to go ahead and keep pursuing these fossil fuels, so that when they, for instance, muck up 70 miles of the Dan River, as Duke Energy did with their coal ash spill, well, it's just a little bit of cost of doing business. In fact, they didn't get much of a fine at all, and they just keep moving on, and it allows for these kinds of things to happen. Whereas if we did have a free market in energy, and we did have, particularly to reduce the regulations on competitors to these companies, this is one of the main points in having is these regulations, is that companies set them up so that they can comply with them, but maybe new startups cannot. And I think if we could take away those restrictions on those new startups, then people would be able to find new sources of energy that are renewable, cheaper, and cleaner.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes.
It's a great question. Energy. We need to do everything that we can to utilize the natural resources that we have on this continent. We need to cut the apron strings from foreign countries that put our soldiers at risk because we have to go over there and fight for oil. We need to rely on the natural resources here. It's a great question about energy. You'll see that there are obviously two candidates who are absent here tonight. And I will say this, because I've been behind the curtain and I've been offered the poison special interest as an elected official, and I told them, take a hike, no sale. Most of our elected officials are owned by special interest. They can't even tell you what tie they're going to wear in the morning without phoning up one of the special interests saying, should I wear the red one or the blue one? It's absolutely unacceptable. Energy has huge money influence in our political system, and it shouldn't. We need to do everything that we can to rely on the natural resources we have in this country. And we need to cut our dependence on foreign oil and energy. And we need to get that special interest money out of politics.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll begin the next question with Mr. Gurney. Is there too much money in politics? Should contributions to political campaigns be limited by dollar amount? Would you support campaign finance laws that require all funds be from individuals residing in the district and all donations be reported on a website?
Yes. It's all crooked. It's all crooked. It goes to the highest bidder. I happen to have a stance that I've written that I believe that a presidential bid in the general election should be limited to $50 million per party. I think in a senatorial campaign it should be limited to $1 million. They want to have campaign finance reform, and then they all take money behind the scenes, the Democrats and the Republicans. Makes no difference. They're both, like John said, they're both beholden to the powers that be behind the curtain. So whoever's got the money is who's going to call the shots. And that's what the problem with our government is now. We can't do that. We just can't do that. So, yes, I believe there should be campaign finance reform, and yes, it should be very frugal. And if they can't sell themselves on their own agenda, on their own ideas, on their own abilities, or they're getting out and campaigning, then they don't deserve to even hold an office.
Thank you, Mr. Haugh.
I find it quite fascinating that here I am. I just filed my FEC report a couple days ago, and I have raised now, as of this point, not as of October 1st, but even a little bit after, just over $10,000. So I find it fascinating that people are willing to spend $50 million or more, put somebody in a job that pays $174,000 a year. And the reason why is this corporate special interest control. It's cheaper for them to pay out this money to influence our elections than it is for them to actually try to influence millions of Americans to buy their product in a free market. So the problem is that, anything that we try to do to regulate that, to limit it, it's like playing whack-a-mole. You restrict it in one place and they find another place. And now the Supreme Court has said in Citizens United that basically bribery is legal today. Well, it doesn't change the fact that it's still bribery, but you can use corporations now to influence elections in this way, and it's perfectly approved by the Supreme Court. So really the only way to address this issue, in a sense, is to abolish the product, to decentralize the federal government so that it's no longer just one-stop shopping for corporate special interests, and devolve these powers to the states and the people, decentralize them so that there is no way anymore for people to completely get their way if they can just find the right legislators with enough money.
Mr. Rhodes.
Yeah, it's a great question. I hit on it a little bit earlier in another question. One of the things that it might be astounding to you, but really there is no difference in the two parties. Sure, the rhetoric is different and whatnot, but basically what you have is you have Main Street. And on the left side of the street, you have Republican Incorporated, and on the right side of the street, you have Democrat Incorporated. And they're basically churning out the same cheap product out of the back room and selling it to the public. They'll try to swoon and huckster voters in on the left side of the street with these great window dressings and swoon voters and huckster them in for their money on the right side of the street with their window dressings, whatever the issue is. You know what the Democrats' line normally is and the Republicans' line. I don't know what the Libertarians' line is, but no disrespect, Mr.
We're a little
Hall.
bit different.
Okay. But there is no difference. It's basically using you, citizens, and I make eye contact with each one of you, because you are these two parties' pawns. You are just pawns. You don't even make bishop. You're pawns on a chessboard. And it all has to do with money and politics. Should we have reform? No, we should just enforce the rules that we have now. But we have to educate the public to let them know, listen, there is no difference in the two parties. They're selling you the same cheap product. It's just dressed up with a little bit different bow and a little different packaging to try to huckster money and votes out of you. And once the election's over, y'all are out of the equation. You don't even play into the equation. Remember, huckstering you for money and votes. And that's what it's pretty much summed up to.
Thank you. Mr. Waddell.
How am I supposed to follow those? Really, I like all of them. I mean, they're the three fantastic answers. And Mr. Rhodes, I had one little idea I could share, and he stole my thunder. So, but seriously, I hate to echo three comments, and I'm trying to think of something to add to it other than why is so much money spent on marketing a campaign? Because there's a market for the influence. And there wouldn't be such a big market for the influence over us if we were a little more self-guided in these decisions and people didn't bite it. In other words, a company isn't going to spend a whole lot marketing a product in a specific avenue or venue unless it's effective. And it's only effective if it reaches the target group. So if we can get to some of these people and educate, that is probably the most important thing that everyone in this room can do. Reach out to friends, family that may be just a little clueless on real matters, a little bit beyond the evening news. I mean, what you're looking at is the effect of the problem a lot of times. So let's maybe take it a step further than talk about the campaign finance reform problems, because as they said, no matter what regulations you put in place, they're just going to find a loophole. They're lawyers, for crying out loud, half of them. That's what they do for a living. They're going to find a loophole. So we need to get it from the other end as well. Yes, it does need to be addressed. But like I say, if I had more faith that legislators would regulate their own powers, I would probably be a little more excited about that avenue. But I think our best bet is to educate the people.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Haugh. If you were in office during the Senate's vote on arming and training Syrian moderates against ISIS, how would you have voted and why? What in general do you feel America's role is in foreign affairs? What duty do we have to our allies? How do we best confront our enemies?
Well, we need to return to the wise advice that was given to us by Washington and Jefferson when they counseled us to enter into entangling alliances with none and free trade with all. I have several videos on my YouTube channel and on my website, SeanHaugh.com, on this topic, that we are now entering our third Mideast war. The first two were completely disastrous, and now we've fostered this greater, new, well-organized enemy in ISIS who's armed to the teeth with our weapons and our training. If you may recall that some of the members of the Executive Council of ISIS were some of the last round of moderate Syrian rebels that we thought were going to be the good guys. And we've been making this mistake over and over again since at least the Taliban in Afghanistan, who were supposed to be the good guys to counter Soviet influence in that region, or as Osama bin Laden was considered a good CIA asset. You know, there's pictures of John McCain out there with these folks saying, oh yeah, these are the freedom fighters that are going to help bring stability to the region. Well, we need to stop it because that's just not working. And all they can think of to try to fix the problems from previous wars and previous bombings is more war and more bombing. And I think pretty much everybody sees through that at this point, that this is not working. As I said earlier, there's no amount of war or bombing that is going to fix the least little bit of the problems we've already caused. We just need to get out of that region, and most particularly stop flooding that region with weapons.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes.
Let me make it crystal clear, and that is this. If we are committed to eliminating ISIS, we need to go in and hit them hard and derail that train and take them out. If we don't, we need to bring our troops home, because all we're doing is we're feeding them to the monster. And it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to their families, and it's not fair to our country. We're committed to the mission. We go in and we take them out, or we bring our troops home. You know, you don't play ring and run at a crack dealer's door. That just ticks him off. You go with the battering ram and you knock it in and you put them out of business. We need to be committed. Secondly, we do not need to be putting weapons in the hands of enemies who will turn them on our own soldiers and our own people. Absolutely not. You want to talk about a senator who will probably get an ethics charge for standing on the House floor and fighting and making a lot of noise about that, just like I did in Raleigh? I will fight vehemently against putting weapons in hands of our future enemies who will then turn them and kill our own sons and daughters of our country. No weapons in enemies' hands. And if we're not committed to the mission, going in and taking them out, then just bring them home. And let the American people get their guts about them to go in and eliminate ISIS at a later date.
All right, Mr. Waddell.
I think much of our foreign policy is crafted around the effects of yesterday's foreign policy. We are dealing with regimes now that we helped institute. We are dealing with organizations that have been funded in part by people we sent foreign aid to. I really think that we have created some of our own, I'm being generous there, many of our own problems as far as foreign policy. And it comes down to this sense of global community. I really believe that the best thing we could do for foreign policy is, now, first of all, you're given a choice, a false dichotomy here. Are you going to be an isolationist and live in a cave under a rock, or are you going to just go ahead and bomb anything that moves that isn't chanting USA? You know, so it's like you're given this false dichotomy. So getting past that, what we need to do is withdraw from the UN and quit putting our soldiers in the hands of an International Homeowners Association. 'Cause that's all they are.
Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
Well, evil's been around a long time, real long time. It's not going anywhere. I don't know if you feel the same as me, but I think it's getting worse. And there's a saying that says, you know, it applies to people, but you can apply it to a country. For evil to succeed, all that has to happen is for someone to, for a good person to do nothing. We are a superpower. We are the superpower. I live on the coast between Camp Lejeune, or Lejeune, however you want to pronounce it, and Cherry Point, Marine Corps Air Station, and not too far from Seymour Johnson. These men and women are fantastic. I do work on the bases. I'm a contractor. And they're 20 years old, 22 years old, and they do what the country asks them to do. And for anything to happen overseas, I think there's got to be a 2 or 3 pronged attack, if you will. One is in foreign policy, I would defund any country that has terrorism, terrorists, or is not a democratic nation. We go over there and try to buy their favor and so they won't attack us, and that doesn't work. All they do is funnel the money to the top, and then they're as crooked as some of the people in this country. It's wrong. We have to go over there to meet the enemy, and I'd rather meet them there than here. And if they're promising that they're going to come here and put a flag on the White House, and they're beheading people like it's nothing, I tend to believe them, and I would think that we should take care of business there and get it done.
All right, thank you. The next question will begin with Mr. Rhodes. Public-private partnerships, P3s, have become a popular way to fund infrastructure improvements. The practice is supported from the Obama administration on down to local municipal governments. They involve the transfer of public infrastructure to a private company, which will then run that enterprise for a profit. How do you compare a P3-funded project to a taxpayer-funded project? What are the pros and cons?
Well, let me just share this with you. There again, there's where the two parties don't really have a whole lot of distinction between the two. Both of them are involved in the public-private partnerships. Government has no business picking winners and losers in regards to these items. Let the free market reign. It's corporate cronyism. Again, it's a legalized way of stealing from you, the public, through the elected officials' hands and back into private individuals. It's actually like an elected official is taking money out of the public till, taking it here, giving it to the private individual to do their P3, and then at election time, the money wheel just comes back around. The same Benjamins right back in that elected official's pocket. Next time, the money wheel starts again. What other great scheme or scam is going to happen? In North Mecklenburg, our elected official, the guy to my left here, that's not here, is pushing for toll roads. Public-private partnership that is going to own our highway system up 77 and many other roadways throughout North Carolina for the next 50 years. Boy, I'll tell you what, they're really looking out for us, aren't they? The money wheel. It goes into the public's hand, the good old boy public's hand, not us public, goes into the elected official's pocket, and the money wheel continues. 3-card money. That's all it is. I wouldn't support a private-public partnership, by the way.
Thank you. Mr. Waddell.
You know, a long time ago, I thought it sounded like a really good idea. At least it looked like it on paper. And then I met a couple of them, public-private partnerships. And I'm going to tell you, everything Mr. Rhodes just said is absolutely correct. They are evil. They siphon money out of the public's hand, and it's given to their friends. And not only that, but there's a lot of laws that just don't really seem to matter in that case, you know, where a private corporation or private business would have to be subjected to these laws and regulations and these guidelines. They just don't matter when it's for a P3. Infrastructure, parks aren't infrastructure. You know, water fountains, that's not infrastructure. You know, railways, waterways, ports, highways, interstate, state roads. That's probably the extent government really needs to be involved in constructing infrastructure, bridges, that sort of thing. It doesn't mean it can't be done privately. But when you merge the two, you're putting the force of government with the ability to take money from the people, and you're combining that with a private interest, and it is so open to corruption. And I just don't trust it personally after what I have personally seen on a local level, and I can only imagine what it's like on the national level. So yeah, the United States government has no business doing public-private partnerships that I can tell, except for maybe defense, certain types of defense situations where you can hire a contractor to build something. But public funds should never be used for anything other than critical infrastructure or emergencies.
Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
Well, I'm an avid football fan, love it. When they take public money and build a football stadium, I can't imagine how that happens. I just can't. I can't. I understand it brings money to the city and so on and so forth, but it just doesn't make sense. The government's broke. The government is broke. The government takes in more money now than it has in its entire history. Takes in about $2.5 trillion a year through your taxes and doles out $4 trillion. And you don't have to be a mathematician to figure that out. They're printing $85 billion a month. Now, if they think they got extra money to do private partnerships, somebody needs to make them aware of the deficit that they're spending. We're $18 trillion in debt that you guys and your children are going to be paying. We'll be long gone. You guys are going to be left holding the bag. There's no money. The government has to cut back, and this is one of the areas that's just so easy to do. It would make no difference in anybody's life if they didn't fund the project. That's it.
Mr. Haugh.
I think we've already sort of covered up here that it is pretty much straight up corporate welfare, that the purposes of government should be limited, and that there are certain aspects of government that absolutely should not be privatized in any way. One that really burns me is privatizing prisons or criminal justice in any way, because then what you're doing is giving a for-profit company an incentive, because of course in order to survive in the free market you have to continue to grow, and that gives forces, unaccountable forces in our society, a very strong incentive to cram as many people into prison as possible so that they can continue to grow their business and satisfy their shareholders and make money for themselves. The people who most vehemently oppose the end of this insane war on drugs are the people who are making money off of private prisons, because of course they don't want to cut off their revenue stream. And so allowing business to take up some of these roles of government really only puts more power in those hands and makes it harder for us to achieve much needed reforms, such as the legalization of marijuana. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question will begin with Mr. Waddell. There are two growing movements in this country. One supports the idea that state nullification of unconstitutional laws being handed down by the federal government. The other seeks an Article 5 convention for the purpose of passing clarifying amendments to the Constitution. Where do you stand on either of these processes? Are either necessary at all?
Absolutely, nullification is necessary, and in fact, there are a few things that the state of North Carolina should have already moved on to nullify federal. Obamacare should have been wiped out by now. This federal court, regardless of your view on gay marriage, I want to share something with you. I think it's very, very possible that it should be thrown out by the Supreme Court, because it really has no jurisdiction over the federal court. It's a state matter. It was a constitutional amendment passed by popular vote by the people in North Carolina. The authority, the right of the authority to govern is derived from the consent of the governed. And there's no enumerated powers of the federal government in the U.S. Constitution to define marriage. So I think it should be nullified. The governor and our state attorney general needs to do their job or stand down. It's just, if you're not willing to do your job, go home. And the state general assembly needs to do something to call these guys out on this. Article 10 convention, real simple. If the Constitution we have right now is broken and our government isn't even following it, what makes you think they're going to follow a new one? Really, they don't care. And it comes down to the people need to take the reins back. You need to get involved. Don't go to sleep between elections. Don't just show up and vote for the presidential election. Stay awake, stay involved, and plugged in. You got to take the reins back. That's the only thing that's really going to fix it. Wake up.
Mr. Gurney.
If you take the constitutions in all seriousness, it's just not something you just ignore. It's not something you just decide you're going to have it become a living, breathing document. You're going to interpret the way this generation thinks or that generation thinks. It's going to change over time. No, it was written. It was written almost in blood. It means something. It means a lot. And for people to ignore it or for people to override it or without going through the procedures set forth in the Constitution, it's a travesty and it's a crime. It's a crime against the country. It truly is. So whether it's the state constitution, a federal constitution, or any of the state's constitutions, they need to be upheld. And if the Supreme Court wants to take every single case, then they should. If the district courts or a regional court, a federal court decides to overturn something that was voted on or a constitution that was written by the people of that state, the states deserve to have their rights. Those are their rights. Each state has its rights in the Constitution. The federal government doesn't have a right to tell the states what to do. The federal government doesn't have a right to tell you what to put in your school system. They have no rights. Those are all states' rights. So what they need to do is adhere to the constitutions and just do what they're supposed to do. But with the judges, the activist judges and stuff, it becomes more and more difficult. And I think, again, that's why you have to go through the Senate. If we can take this over one state or two states at a time, it will make a difference.
Mr. Haugh.
Oh, I think nullification is a very important tool that the states can use, but I'd like to correct a couple of things that I've heard up here that I particularly find nonsense. Number one is that states do not have rights. People have rights. The whole concept of rights has to do with the individual human being. An organization cannot claim human rights at all. We need a different model to look at it. And also, we live in a republic, which is like a democracy, except that we put a limit on it saying that 51% cannot vote to take away the rights of the other 49%. So that's sort of the dividing line that I look at when I look at nullification movements. For example, Colorado and Washington State, I think, rightly nullified federal law to expand people's rights and to expand people's freedoms and to push back the federal government in an area where they should not be in legalizing marijuana when they did that. That states have taken action to push back other matters of overreach of the federal government in order to protect the people and expand people's rights. However, I find it bizarre to hear people who love the republic talking about the ability of 60% of the people to vote to take away the rights of a certain class of people. Everybody has the same rights, or none of us enjoy them at all. And so when we're talking about nullification and we're talking about how our government should work on our behalf, that is the guideline for me. How can we protect and expand the rights of people so everybody can enjoy them equally?
Mr. Rhodes.
Nullification, yes. I'm not going to get too far down in the weeds on that because that is a very complex issue. But nullification, yes. It's an important tool. Convention of States, it's bad, folks. Let me tell you, do you want elected officials that are actually leading our state right now to be making decisions as to who gets to make decisions for you, we the people? It's bad. Convention of States. You know, somebody once asked me, they said, when I was serving up in Raleigh, they said, John, don't you think we ought to have a constitutional convention? And I said, well, you know what? Why don't we just adhere to the one that we have now without having to change it up? You know, I mean, it's a great blueprint. Convention of States, no. I would fight against that. You would hear me all the way from D.C. My voice would echo across the Potomac all the way down to North Carolina fighting that issue, and I certainly would tell my colleagues, share with my colleagues, fight against my colleagues in the North Carolina State Legislature, don't do this to our people. No, it's bad. I wouldn't support a convention of states, no.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Gurney. The income tax code of the United States is burdensome and complicated, with compliance costs alone estimated to be nearly $500 billion annually by the Tax Foundation. What, if any, alternatives to the current system of taxation do you support?
First of all, the IRS has a lot of other issues too. They can't find emails, they're spying on people, they're holding back things. I mean, that whole system is corrupt. I mean, it's just totally corrupt. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be real hard because there's so many special interest people involved in that, tax accountants, tax attorneys, lawyers, so on and so forth. And plus, remember, Congress writes the tax laws. It's not something that the IRS came up with. So Congress needs to change them. And so what Congress would have to do is get together and get that done. But the problem is they write the laws that favor them. They don't care about us. Sean talked about raising $10,000 for his campaign. I've taken zero, not one dime, not one dime. You don't need everything from the federal government. And I think if the federal government went with a flat tax of, I'd probably scale it into two groups, 10 and 15%, and then let the markets take care of that. And if they can't operate off of that, then they're going to, and put in a balanced budget amendment, they're going to have to operate off of that. And that's just a plain, simple truth.
Mr. Haugh?
Well, I tend to look at things more from the spending side first, because government has gotten to be way too big. It takes such a huge bite out of our total economy, leaving less and less wealth for people. Taxes is only one way that wealth is being taken from us in order to feed this ever-expanding federal government and to take care of their corporate special interests. Inflation is another way. And it seems like pretty much all monetary policy is based on how to transfer wealth out of our pockets into the pockets of financial interests. But I do believe that the federal income tax should be abolished. I believe that we can, by eliminating war and by eliminating corporate welfare, we can balance the budget at a much lower level and reduce or eliminate, rather, the income tax, as well as a whole other big host of little taxes on pretty much everything that people do, in order to let you keep all the money that you earn, because I think that you can invest that money and spend that money far more wisely, far more efficiently than we could as politicians and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes?
When I served in Raleigh up in the North Carolina legislature, I authored a bill called the North Carolina Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And basically what that said is you're going to increase spending based on how many people there are in the state, population, so that, you know, you don't like have to raise $6 million to serve like 2 people, because that's like kind of the ratio. Government always wants to spend more of your money. And it's a program that worked out in Colorado. It's a program that's worked. The Republicans and Democrats fought me against it. They killed the bill. But a taxpayer bill of rights would have been a good thing for North Carolina. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. Again, it goes back to, in my opening statement, does it put more money in the public's hands and power in the public's hands, or does it put more money in government's hands? We need to keep more money in the public's hands, because those are the entrepreneurs that are building our state, they're building our country, and these are the folks that are making our country strong, making America strong. Government creates nothing except problems. It doesn't create jobs. If any politician tells you that government creates jobs, you turn your back on them and say, fibber, government creates nothing. They create problems. And then they come around later and they pretend to be the guy that rides in on the white horse and says, I'm going to fix it. Well, you created it before. So how are you going to fix it? But in regards to taxation, you know, there are a lot of different things: flat tax, fair tax, purple tax, yellow tax, whatever. Whatever the policy is that will put more money in the public's hands and let them keep more of their money is the policy that I'm going to fight for. And we may not have even developed it yet, but we certainly authored a taxpayer bill of rights in North Carolina, and you know what Republican Inc. and Democrat Inc. said? Don't be taking our money. Well, I said Republican Inc. and Democrat Inc. is not
Thank you,
your
Mr.
money
Rhodes.
to take.
Thank you. Mr. Waddell.
Our federal tax codes, I'd like to take them and the Affordable Care Act and kill them, burn them, and then bury their ashes. I'd like to see what I would really like to see is just roll back the federal government to its enumerated powers as defined by the Constitution. That would do wonders for the budget and shut down the alphabet soup. You know, all these little organizations that the government sets up to do all these things that really has no business being in the middle of. Shut that down. And if you really want to get creative with the tax code, roll it back to prior to 1808. You know, where people elected their state representation, and the state representation and their House of Representatives to the United States would determine their Senate and their president. Talk about the campaign finance reform. You've just taken all the corrupt money out of the federal, that part of the federal government election. Now it brings it back home to the state, though, you know. So, but people will pay attention to their state legislation. People don't watch that. So there's a solution for you, something to think about, rolling it back to 1808, where the states paid an apportionment tax. That's how the federal government is funded. And it's based on population. So that if you have a bigger state, you have more people, you pay a little more into it. And if you're Rhode Island and you don't have as many people, hey, it's scaled back accordingly.
Thank you. All right, our next question, we will begin with Mr. Haugh. Immigration reform seems to be a perennial issue. Is illegal immigration a problem? If so, how do you solve it?
We need to stop all war. Our biggest problem with immigration imbalances in this country is because people are fleeing terrible situations in countries, particularly like Mexico and Honduras. If we stop the war on drugs, that would immediately break the power of the Mexican drug cartels that are causing such violence and chaos in Mexico now. You look at Honduras. Why are there so many Honduran restaurants opening up around town these days? It's because Honduras not that long ago was a fairly stable country, but they elected somebody that we didn't like, and so we got rid of that guy, and ever since then, the Honduran government has really been in chaos, and now it's the murder capital of the world. Well, of course, people don't want to live in the murder capital of the world. They want to come somewhere where they're less likely to get shot. So if we stop the war on drugs, stop interfering in the affairs of Central and Latin American nations, then the people who are from there would have much more incentive to stay home to try to build something for themselves and their families, or if they've already come here, to return there. And we have to get at the root of why people have so much incentive to move to the United States, to really understand how to address this issue. But meanwhile, we need to make sure that we treat all immigrants as human beings. Everybody I don't like the term illegal immigrants. I don't like a lot of terms that we use to try to label people so that we can somehow dehumanize them. All these people are real people making real decisions to try to improve their lives and the lives of their families.
Mr. Rhodes.
Let me just make it crystal clear. If you're in this country illegally, you need to be deported immediately. You need to go back to your country of origin, and you need to come into the United States through the legally prescribed manner. You know, if we don't know who's in our country, we really don't have a country. We have an issue of Ebola. You know, what other diseases are coming into our country that are affecting our citizens? Also, the illegal invaders that are coming into our country, they are taking the resources that tax-paying citizens have worked very hard to pay for. So if you're in this country illegally, you need to go back home. You need to be deported immediately. And if you want to become an American citizen, do it the legal way. Key word here, illegal invader. You need to do it the legal way and become an American citizen. In regards to the border, we need to make that wall very high, and we need to enforce it, and we need to give every Border Patrol agent the resources that they need to protect our country from any border of the United States of America. That's why we call it the United States of America. It's not the North American, piece of real estate that includes Canada and South America and North America. It is the United States of America, and yes, we have a fence. And if you want to come in, you do it the legal way. But if you're not here legally, go home. And if you want to become an American citizen, do it in the legally prescribed manner.
Mr. Waddell.
Immigration was much more simple before I met Cruz and Jesse, some guys I worked with. One of them was legal, the other one wasn't. This is when I was working for someone else way back in the 90s and fell in love with these guys. They were wonderful. But that being said, we are not a sovereign nation unless we uphold our borders. And I think it was Alan Keyes that answered it very simply as far as immigration: uphold the law. 3 words. There is a way for them to legally enter this country. And I really think that one of the reasons that the Democrats and Republicans have played footsie with this so much and just kicked the can down the road and just pass it off to each other to fix is we have had 50 million people removed from our society through abortion. And we have 70 million baby boomers about to retire and start drawing from Social Security. That's a bad way to run a Ponzi scheme. I really think part of the reason we're allowing so many people to come in here is to replace the ones we've taken. And call it a conspiracy theory if you want, but the numbers, they add up too much to ignore. And then once you have the families come in with them, it will balance out if you can get them on the tax rolls. I really think to save Social Security, we're leaving the borders open to bring some people in to balance the equation. I hope I'm wrong, and I've put the challenge out there before. If I'm wrong, prove it. I'd love to hear it, 'cause I'd really like to be.
Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
Well, first of all, I don't think legalizing marijuana is going to solve all our ills. It's just not going to work. It's not why people come here, because of our drug laws. It's just not true. If you look at California, they're going to be crushed under the weight of illegal immigration. And there's nothing wrong with immigration. We have quotas for immigration. We have real quotas. And there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, it's enough. And, we've got quotas. We got people who've been waiting in China or India or Scandinavia, wherever it is. They want to come here and study medicine, want to do this, want to do that. They come here on educational visas, but they they come here legally. That's a good thing. Illegal immigrants, and you can talk about them, and you can disparage them if you want. I don't. I have a fellow that mows my grass at home. His name's Ramon, but he has 4 kids. He paid for green cards for his whole family. It cost him $20,000. What does that say to him when he's got to pay $20,000 and he's taking his test next year for citizenship? What's that say to him? You can do it the right way if you want, you sucker. But, anybody else that can get over here on a jet ski, we'll just let them stay. It's just wrong. There's right and wrong in this world, and it's wrong. And that's just the way it's got to be.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, we begin with Mr. Rhodes. You mentioned Ebola in your last answer. We are currently in the midst of the first deaths resulting from exposure to Ebola on U.S. soil. How do you rank the job of the CDC thus far in terms of communication and containment? And what response should the U.S. have in terms of preventing the spread of Ebola? For example, can the government impose mandatory quarantines in order to protect the general population?
Well, let me share this with you, a little of my public service history. I was a medic and a firefighter. I worked for Medic here in Mecklenburg County, and I was a firefighter as well. And when I worked in EMS, the AIDS epidemic was just starting. We didn't even used to wear latex gloves when we'd go out on a call. And now we do, and we did, and a lot of different things were put into place as a result of the AIDS epidemic. But now we got a new threat. It's called Ebola. One of the things we need to do is we need to isolate that disease. And we don't isolate the disease by sending airplanes over to Africa and having people in a high-risk area get on a plane and come back into the United States and seed the population with the disease. That's absolutely asking for trouble. We need to restrict air travel to areas that are highly prone to the Ebola. Secondly, the CDC, how are they doing? I don't think that they have all the answers. That's one thing about a politician that has all the answers. You got to really be suspect of those cats. If they say, I really don't know the answer to that, but we're working real hard to kind of bend our mind around it and work it out, I'd probably trust that guy a little more, that gal a little more. But I don't think that the CDC really knows all that they need to know to really give us answers. But we do need to do what we do need to know, just common sense. We need to restrict air travel from areas that where it's highly prone to not bring it into the United States. And again, that goes to securing our borders to the south and to the north to make sure that we don't have folks coming into the country that are undocumented, that we don't know what kind of diseases that they're bringing into the country that are going to affect our citizens. As an elected official, we have the duty to act to protect our citizens, that is Americans. And if it's saying, sorry, U.S. Airways flight number 3020 over to wherever in Africa,
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes.
we need to restrict it.
Mr. Waddell.
Ebola is very contagious from what I've read, and I've also read that it has a very high mortality rate compared to most. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's not so much that people catch it, it's the mortality rate of it. So, you're more likely to die if you do catch it, from what I understand. And I'm at the mercy of what I read in the news, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on it. But as far as spreading or calming down the spread of Ebola, I recently read a little article online that said that there were 2 nations in Africa that have managed to really, they've had a very successful effort in reducing Ebola, and those 2 nations have one thing in common: they closed their borders. I'm not saying we need to entirely shut down our borders, but we do need to regulate travel into and out of areas that are known infectious areas. And if people want to go there on mission trips, God bless you, that's your right, fine. When you come back, you need to be quarantined before you go out into the public. Especially if you've been in hot zones. As far as taking away our constitutional rights just because somebody's afraid, no, absolutely not. I think this is where people need to take some personal responsibility here to prevent that kind of situation from being necessary in the eyes of some. if you are knowingly in an area where you may be contaminated or you may be infected, the last thing you do is keep going to church, go to school, go to work, and infect people around you. Take some personal responsibility, folks.
Thank you. Senator Gurney.
Well, again, the government, like I say, I believe in times they sit around, they come up with ideas they think are good, and they sound good. You know, let's help the people, let's help the poor people, and so on and so forth. But they don't have a plan. This is a perfect example. In the whole of the United States, 332 million people, they have 11 beds for people with really highly contagious diseases. 11. Do you think that that was well thought out? Do you think you invite people to the country that are infected with Ebola when you have the max is 11 beds? That's just not even common sense. So what you need to do is stop it where it's at. And even the people in Africa have said that. And I can't remember the country, I heard this on the radio, that they've closed their borders, they're isolating the people, they're treating it. The Doctors Without Borders have gone there. There's, I think 9 of them have died. There's 260 some odd other workers who have contacted the disease and died, trying to help. So if you have an open border, you have these kids coming across, and God bless them. But it wasn't an accident that they were sent here, 30-day trek from Honduras, wherever they came from. They're coming in here with Torah 68, I think it is, and also 69, 70, 71. And that's infecting our children, our American children. Do you want to fix things? Then at least isolate the problem and then work on the problem. You don't invite everybody here and then try to figure it out on the fly.
Mr. Haugh.
Everybody's an epidemiologist. You know, and I'm not an epidemiologist. I haven't had that training. I have had the opportunity to work with a lot of different federal agencies, and one of them is the CDC. And I have more respect for CDC scientists than just about any other people that I have worked with in the federal government. Not the politicians, not the bureaucrats. If you look at the political response now, it is being designed to shed blame, that nobody is going to take enough responsibility that they can be blamed for what may or may not go wrong. But you look at the problems, particularly in Dallas, but in other places where we have had Ebola outside of Africa, or at least it's because CDC protocols were not followed. The scientists know what they're doing, and as a senator, I would want to go directly to them and just bypass the politicians and the bureaucrats that are hamstringing them. I'm sure that a lot of these scientists are yelling and screaming at their bosses too, like, what, are you out of your mind? But I would want to go straight to them so that I could be informed on what's what. And ideas like a travel ban, that seems to make sense on the surface, but we're all preaching out of a complete lack of knowledge of epidemiology. I would like to talk to the experts about it. I've tried to listen to some of them in various contexts, and I've heard that maybe travel bans are not the way to go. But it just seems like this is a way for people to ratchet up fears and come up with these solutions that are going to take away our freedoms that may or may not have anything to do with actually containing this disease.
Okay, thank you. I think in the interest of the time, this will be our last question. We'll go to Mr. Waddell. I'll try to combine a couple different ones here.
Is this like a 2 or 3 part question?
It'll be a 20-part question.
Okay.
Give me about 15 minutes.
So then I can pretty much answer however I want, right?
We'll get through it.
Okay.
In this new world of terrorism threats, what are your thoughts on NSA domestic spying programs, the allowance of indefinite detention of American citizens by the military as authorized by the National Defense Authorization Act? And along those lines, as we've seen recently in Ferguson, Missouri, police departments, are they becoming too militarized? There's a program from the Pentagon that provides military surplus equipment to them. In handling domestic terrorism, how do you see these policies working themselves out?
Okay, let's start at home. There's a difference between law enforcement and peacekeeping. Keeping an officer of the peace is not the same as a law enforcer, okay? Half the time, the laws that the law enforcer is enforcing aren't even laws, they're policies written by experts who were paid a lot of money to write these policies. And the officer is trained in case law, not the Constitution, not the actual law, what the courts are saying. So at home, the answer is get rid of this law enforcement model. Ferguson, I believe, has been compounded. The problem in Ferguson has been compounded because of a culture that is responding to a model of law enforcement being applied to it. If they would consider a more peacekeeping approach, I really think they would have better results. Taking it more abroad, the war on terror has done more to erode our rights than pretty much any other thing that I can recall. What the Patriot Act and NDAA have done to this nation is probably enough to have made our forefathers just retch in disgust. We are led by fear. We're being so manipulated right now. And I think that the terror threat, I'm not saying it isn't real. It is a real threat. There are really people out there that, are bad dudes. But I think our foreign policy is what creates some of these problems. And we need to reconsider the effect of our foreign policy and how much it spawns these reactions by these groups to come toward us.
Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
Well, now that program gone bad, the NSA, originally was supposed to spy on overseas people that they had cell phone information on where they could track their calls. They have no right to track an American citizen's phone call unless they've gone to a judge, gotten a warrant, and has probable cause to find something. They're on a fishing expedition. They want to search your emails. They go on Facebook. They go on YouTube. They're watching and recording and downloading and storing everything they can. They're profiling and doing facial recognitions. They have way overstepped their bounds. They're this big brother in the beginnings and maybe even past the beginnings right now. That needs to be stopped, and it's got to be stopped by Congress. No one else can stop that. Executive orders don't last very long. Anything that's done by an executive order can be overridden by Congress. So we need to reel NSA back in a hurry. And as far as the law enforcement officials and such, we have a chain of command. We have the United States military that protects us on massive levels and all over the world and in our own borders, if need be. Then we have the National Guard. They're there to help each state. Each state has their own National Guard. If they need to be called out for something, for a terror attack, they need to be called out. And then most police departments have SWAT teams. And so they are used for that instance. And then you have your patrol officers. And they're not bad people. They don't do mean things. They're your neighbors, they're your friends. They do their best, and they're under a lot of restriction to even enforce the law. So it's a difficult situation, but if they go through the chain of commands that they have available to them, everything will be okay.
Mr. Haugh.
We need to stop all war. That is what ties all of these different questions together. We have been giving up our freedoms, and we have been killing people around the world. For what? Are we any safer 14 years later? Are we any freer? No, we're not. We are making our country less stable and less free precisely because of war that infects so many areas of government policy. We need to delete the NSA entirely. We ran Richard Nixon out of town for bugging one office, and now we have an administration that is doing comprehensive data collection. We need to stop all of that and delete all of those files immediately. On issues like indefinite detention, the NDAA and Patriot Act issues, taking away our civil liberties is not helping protect us at all from terrorism. And then Ferguson also, and those kinds of issues are tied in because the war mentality has infected everything, foreign and domestic, in our thinking. And now we have a situation where the police are at war with us, or at least some segment of us, and they're allowed to get away with shooting down somebody or choking somebody to death in the street with impunity. The law needs to apply to absolutely everybody equally, and we need to stop all wars so we can stop this sick mentality from infecting every aspect of our culture and turning us against each other.
And Mr. Rhodes.
Well, you can make the issue as complex as you want to. Let's go back to the directions. What does the Constitution say? What does the Constitution say? In regards to NSA spying, as your U.S. Senator, the question, does it put more power in citizens' hands or does it put more power in government's hands? Does it fight for the liberties and freedoms of citizens, or does it put more government power in government's hands? If it puts more power in government's hands, I'm going to fight against it. If it puts more liberties and freedoms in your hand, I'm going to fight for it. NSA, that needs to be eliminated in our country. Bad, bad policy. Certainly unconstitutional. It's like our own country is turned against us as we the people. Has the police departments become too militarized? That's a local issue. Again, when you think of John Rhodes and you think about all of these candidates, the question is, who's going to fight for my liberties and freedoms to put more power in my hands as a citizen and wrest it away and strip it away from government? NSA spying, no way. As a U.S. Senator, I would fight against that again. You'd hear this loud voice from across the Potomac resonating down here in North Carolina, fighting for you.
All right, we'll now begin our closing statements for the evening, and we will begin with Mr. Gurney.
How long is this one, Christian? Christian?
1 minute.
1 minute, thank you. Well, I was on a terrible conviction to do this whole run for U.S. Senate thing, by the Lord. I didn't know what the purpose was at first, and I think I do know now. I think it's to have everybody understand the severity of the situation we're in and to call people to vote. You can vote for any one of us or the people that aren't here. It doesn't matter to me who you vote for, but it matters to the country. I've visited 17, since the middle of June, 17 states, 99 out of 100 counties in North Carolina to see what's going on. It's not pretty out there. We have to change it. I say vote for Barry Gurney. We're going to call it G Day. So on G Day, vote for Gurney. Thank you.
Mr. Haugh.
I decided to run for this office originally as an act of conscience because I personally wanted to walk into the voting booth in November and vote for something other than more war and more debt. And I realized that the Democrats and Republicans are not going to give that to us. They're for perpetual war and unsustainable debt. And so I realized I had the opportunity as a libertarian, since we have ballot access, or we have ballot status, to be able to go to Raleigh and put down my $1,740 and file for this office for myself, just so I personally could vote for something else. And I'm really gratified, actually, that people have heard my message of stop all war and stop spending more money than we have, and are happy to find an alternative. People start looking for me because I'm the alternative on the ballot to the two candidates that have been completely turning people off. But now they find that if they vote for me, however many votes I get in November, you send a message to the Democrats and Republicans. They're going to have to be more libertarian and more peaceful in order to get those voters back. Please visit my website, SeanHaugh.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you coming out tonight. I thank you for Free the Vote for putting this on. You know, I've talked to you quite candidly tonight, and I've shared some information with you, and it's not just been my opinion. I've been an eyewitness. You know, I served in the North Carolina legislature, and I went behind the curtain, and I saw how sausage is made, and I see what an issue that we have in our legislature and our government. And you know, an elected official, when they go into office, they're going to either turn one way or the other. Either they're going to be a government cheerleader or they're going to fight for the people. I'm always going to fight for the people. More power in the public's hands. You know, citizens' liberties and freedoms. That's what I'm about. I didn't eat the poison pill when I was up there, and I fought against it. Please send me to Washington so that I can do war on the floor with Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and all of those folks. Please, I didn't back down in Raleigh, and I won't back down in D.C.
Thank you. And Mr. Waddell.
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be a part of this process, and thank you for everybody who put this together. And I'm very honored to be with these gentlemen up here today. I admire every one of you guys. I really do. And I very much appreciate all of your contributions to the state and to the people. And if there's one last thing I could leave you with to think about, it would be this, and that is that legislation is derived from morality. You cannot legislate without morality. Get a Black's Law Dictionary and look it up. The question is where do we derive our morality from? If you want to fix this country, do some good thinking on that, because when morality becomes relative, so do laws. And our laws no longer reflect God's morality, and so they have become lawless. Let's give that some thought.
Okay. Let's give all the candidates a hand. Okay. Thank you. Great. All right. So again, on behalf of our sponsors, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm sure some of the candidates will stick around. Lots of topics we weren't even able to get to because of the time constraints. So meet these folks, ask them questions. If you're interested in helping them, certainly I'm sure they'd appreciate your help. Thank you for coming.